Introduction to basic shapes in drawing. Drawing is a fundamental skill in art, and mastering the basics is crucial for developing more advanced techniques. At the core of these basics are the simple shapes that form the foundation of almost every complex structure you will encounter in drawing. Understanding and practicing these shapes, circles, squares, triangles, rectangles, and ovals, will give you the tools needed to draw anything from realistic figures to imaginative designs. In this expanded outline, we'll delve deeper into the definition of these shapes, their importance in drawing, and the tools you'll need to get started. Definition of basic shapes. Circles. A circle is a round shape with every point on its edge equidistant from its center. It is one of the most fundamental geometric shapes and is found in countless natural and man-made objects. The simplicity of a circle makes it a powerful tool in drawing, whether it's being used to depict the sun, wheels, or the curvature of a face. Squares. A square is a four-sided shape with all sides of equal length and all angles at 90 degrees. It is a regular polygon and one of the most stable and balanced shapes in geometry. Squares are essential in creating structured, balanced designs and are often used in grid layouts, architectural plans, and more. Triangles. A triangle is a three-sided polygon, and its defining feature is that the sum of its internal angles always equals 180 degrees. Triangles come in various forms: equilateral, isosceles, and scalene, each with unique properties. Triangles are frequently used to create dynamic compositions, add stability to structures, and convey directionality in designs. Rectangles. Rectangles are four-sided shapes with opposite sides of equal length and all angles at 90 degrees. Unlike squares, rectangles have unequal adjacent sides, making them more versatile for representing objects with varied dimensions. They are prevalent in architectural drawings, layouts, and object design, providing a sense of order and proportionality. Ovals. An oval, or an ellipse, is an elongated circle with two axes of different lengths. Ovals are often used to represent rounded objects that are not perfectly circular, such as eggs, faces, or leaves. The smooth, continuous curve of an oval can convey softness and fluidity in a drawing. These basic shapes are not just isolated forms, they are the building blocks of all other drawings. By combining, manipulating, and modifying these shapes, you can create complex structures, from realistic human figures to abstract designs. Importance in drawing. Foundation for complex drawings. Basic shapes are the starting point for almost every drawing. Whether you're sketching a landscape, designing a character, or drafting a blueprint, you'll begin by breaking down the subject into its simplest forms. For instance, when drawing a human figure, an artist might start with an oval for the head, a rectangle for the torso, and circles for the joints. This approach simplifies the process and ensures that the proportions and structure of the drawing are correct before adding details. Enhancing proportions and perspective. Understanding basic shapes helps artists maintain accurate proportions and perspective in their work. When you can break down complex objects into simpler shapes, you can more easily judge their relative sizes and positions. This is particularly important when drawing in perspective, where objects appear smaller as they recede into the distance. By starting with basic shapes, you can ensure that your drawing maintains a sense of depth and realism. Developing drawing confidence. For beginners, drawing can be intimidating, especially when faced with complex subjects. Starting with basic shapes can boost your confidence by providing a clear, manageable starting point. As you practice drawing these shapes, you'll become more comfortable with the act of drawing itself, making it easier to tackle more complex subjects. Over time, you'll develop muscle memory and an intuitive understanding of how these shapes interact, which will translate into more fluid and dynamic drawings. Versatility in artistic styles. Mastery of basic shapes is essential for artists of all styles, from realism to abstract art. In realism, these shapes provide the underlying structure for accurate depictions of the world around us. In abstract art, they can be manipulated and combined in imaginative ways to create visually compelling compositions. Even in stylized art forms like cartoons or anime, basic shapes are used to construct characters and environments. Understanding these shapes allows artists to experiment with style while maintaining a strong structural foundation. Problem solving in drawing. When faced with a challenging subject, breaking it down into basic shapes can be an effective problem-solving tool. For example, if you're struggling to draw a complicated pose or an intricate object, simplifying it into circles, squares, and triangles can make the task more manageable. This method allows you to focus on the overall structure before getting caught up in the details, leading to more accurate and cohesive drawings. Tools needed. To begin practicing basic shapes, you don't need an extensive array of tools, just a few essential items. Pencils. A good set of pencils is indispensable for drawing. Graphite pencils come in a range of hardness, from hard H to soft B, allowing for different levels of precision and shading. For drawing basic shapes, a medium hard pencil like an HB is ideal, as it produces clear lines without being too dark or difficult to erase. As you progress, you may experiment with softer pencils for shading and adding depth to your shapes. Eraser. Mistakes are a natural part of the drawing process, especially when you're just starting. A quality eraser is essential for correcting errors and refining your shapes. A kneaded eraser is particularly useful for drawing, as it can be shaped to erase small details without disturbing the rest of your work. Additionally, using a lighter touch when sketching allows you to make corrections easily. Ruler. A ruler is a helpful tool for ensuring that your shapes are precise, especially when drawing squares, rectangles, or straight lines. While freehand drawing is an important skill, using a ruler can help you develop a sense of proportion and symmetry, which are crucial for creating balanced and accurate shapes. Drawing paper. Choosing the right paper can affect the quality of your drawings. For practicing basic shapes, a smooth, medium-weight paper, such as 80 to 100 GSM, is ideal, as it provides a good surface for both sketching and erasing. As you advance, you might explore different types of paper, such as textured or toned paper, to achieve different effects in your drawings. Optional tools. Compass. For drawing perfect circles and arcs, a compass can be a valuable tool. It ensures that your circles are accurate and consistent in size, which is particularly useful when working on technical or geometric drawings. Templates. Shape templates with pre-cut circles, squares, and other forms can be helpful for beginners who want to practice consistent shapes. These tools are especially useful for learning the proportions and relationships between different shapes. Conclusion. Mastering basic shapes is the first step in becoming a skilled artist. By understanding the properties of circles, squares, triangles, rectangles, and ovals, you'll gain the foundation needed to tackle more complex drawings. With the right tools and consistent practice, these shapes will become second nature, allowing you to approach any drawing challenge with confidence and creativity. Whether you're a beginner or an experienced artist, Revisiting these fundamental shapes can refine your skills and deepen your understanding of the art of drawing. Continuing from the foundational understanding of basic shapes, the next step in developing your drawing skills involves delving deeper into specific shapes, starting with circles, ovals, squares, and rectangles. These shapes not only form the basis of many objects and figures but also play a crucial role in understanding proportion, symmetry, and perspective. By mastering the techniques to draw these shapes, you'll be equipped to create more detailed and accurate drawings. Drawing circles and ovals. Techniques for drawing circles. Freehand versus using templates. Circles are one of the most versatile and essential shapes in drawing. They appear in countless forms, from the sun and moon to the wheels on a vehicle, or the roundness of a face. Being able to draw circles accurately is an invaluable skill, and there are several techniques you can use depending on your needs and the level of precision required. Freehand drawing. Drawing circles freehand is a skill that develops with practice. Start by lightly sketching the outline of a circle, moving your hand in a smooth, continuous motion. One approach is to begin with a small dot at the center and then gradually expand outward in a circular motion. Alternatively, you can sketch multiple rough circles over each other, refining the shape with each pass until you achieve a smooth, even outline. Freehand circles may not be perfectly symmetrical, but this technique is beneficial for adding a natural, organic feel to your drawings. Over time, your muscle memory will improve, and you'll be able to draw circles more accurately without the need for tools. Using templates and compasses. For times when precision is crucial, such as in technical drawings or when creating patterns, using a template or a compass is advisable. A circle template is a piece of plastic with various sized circles cut out, allowing you to trace around the edges to create perfect circles. A compass, on the other hand, consists of a pointed end and a pencil-holding arm that can be adjusted to draw circles of various sizes. By placing the pointed end at the center and rotating the pencil around it, you can create a perfect circle every time. These tools ensure uniformity and accuracy, especially when you need multiple circles of the same size or are working on geometric designs. Proportions and variations. Understanding different sizes and their uses. Understanding the proportions of circles is key to their effective use in drawing. A circle's size can influence how it is perceived and what it represents. For instance, large circles might represent the sun, a spotlight, or the rounded shape of a balloon, while smaller circles could depict eyes, beads, or buttons. When drawing circles of varying sizes, it's important to maintain the proportion of the diameter to the circumference to keep them looking consistent. Circles can also be used in combination with other shapes to create more complex structures. For example, by placing a smaller circle inside a larger one, you can create rings or orbits, which are useful in designs or when drawing planetary systems. Overlapping circles can be used to create patterns such as the classic Venn diagram, which is helpful in organizing information visually. Ovals. Drawing elongated circles and understanding their importance. Ovals, or ellipses, are simply elongated circles and are just as important in drawing. While a circle has one axis and is symmetrical all around, an oval has two axes, a major axis, the longest diameter, and a minor axis, the shortest diameter. The proportions of these axes determine the oval's shape, from nearly circular to highly elongated. Drawing ovals freehand. Drawing ovals freehand requires a bit more finesse than circles, but the technique is similar. Start by lightly sketching the major and minor axes as guide lines, then gradually shape the oval around these axes. It's helpful to keep your hand steady and move it in a smooth, continuous motion, much like with circles. Practice drawing ovals at different angles and proportions to get comfortable with their shape. Ovals in perspective. Ovals are particularly useful in perspective drawing, where circular objects are viewed at an angle. For instance, a wheel or a tabletop viewed from the side becomes an oval rather than a circle. Understanding how to draw ovals accurately in perspective is crucial for achieving realism in your drawings. The more tilted the object, the more elongated the oval becomes, with the major axis corresponding to the widest part of the object. Applications of ovals. Ovals are used in a wide range of applications, from representing the human face to designing objects like mirrors, frames, or machinery parts. They are also fundamental in figure drawing, where they can represent joints, shoulders, or the curvature of muscles. Mastering ovals allows you to create more lifelike and dynamic drawings, as they add a sense of depth and dimension to otherwise flat circles. Drawing squares and rectangles. Understanding dimensions. Equal sides for squares, varied for rectangles. Squares and rectangles are among the most straightforward shapes to draw, yet they are essential in constructing more complex forms and in understanding spatial relationships. Drawing squares. A square is defined by its equal sides and 90-degree angles. To draw a perfect square, start by marking 4 points that will serve as the corners. Use a ruler to ensure that each side is of equal length and that the angles are right angles. Connecting these points will give you a perfect square. This shape is foundational in many aspects of design and architecture, serving as the basis for grids, patterns, and structures. Drawing rectangles. Rectangles are similar to squares but with unequal adjacent sides. They retain the right angles of squares, making them a stable and balanced shape. To draw a rectangle, follow a similar process as with squares, but ensure that the lengths of the opposite sides are equal, while the lengths of adjacent sides differ. Rectangles are incredibly versatile and are used in everything from the layout of a page to the design of buildings and furniture. Variations and uses. Both squares and rectangles can be adjusted to suit various purposes. For example, a square can be divided into smaller squares or rectangles to create a grid, which is often used in design work. Rectangles can be elongated to create strips, bars, or panels, which are common in graphical design, user interfaces, and architecture. Tips for precision. Using rulers and guidelines. When it comes to drawing squares and rectangles, precision is key, especially in architectural or technical drawings where accuracy matters. Using a ruler. A ruler is indispensable when drawing squares and rectangles. It ensures that your lines are straight and your angles are correct. Start by drawing one side of your square or rectangle, then measure and mark the lengths of the adjacent sides. Use the ruler to connect these points, making sure to maintain the right angles at each corner. This technique is essential when accuracy is critical, such as in blueprints or product design. Guidelines and grids. Another useful technique is to create guidelines or grids on your drawing paper. This can be done by lightly drawing horizontal and vertical lines that cross each other at right angles, creating a grid pattern. This grid can serve as a guide for drawing squares and rectangles of various sizes. The grid helps maintain consistency in your drawings and is particularly useful in more complex compositions where multiple shapes need to be aligned. Freehand practice. While rulers and grids are excellent tools for achieving precision, practicing drawing squares and rectangles freehand is also beneficial. Freehand drawing improves your spatial awareness and your ability to judge proportions without relying on tools. Start by drawing small squares and rectangles, focusing on keeping the sides straight and the angles consistent. Over time, you'll develop a steadier hand and a better eye for symmetry. Perspective practice. How squares and rectangles change with perspective. Perspective is a fundamental concept in drawing that deals with how objects appear smaller as they move further away from the viewer. Understanding how squares and rectangles change with perspective is crucial for creating realistic and dynamic drawings. One-point perspective. In one-point perspective, all lines that are parallel to the viewer's line of sight converge at a single point on the horizon, known as the vanishing point. When drawing a square or rectangle in one-point perspective, the sides that are perpendicular to the viewer will remain parallel, while the sides that recede into the distance will converge towards the vanishing point. This technique is often used in architectural drawings to represent hallways, roads, or any scene with a strong sense of depth. Two-point perspective. Two-point perspective is used when the object is viewed at an angle rather than head-on. In this case, both sets of parallel lines converge towards two different vanishing points on the horizon line. When drawing squares and rectangles in two-point perspective, the corners that are closest to the viewer will appear larger, while the corners that are further away will be smaller. This creates a more dynamic and realistic depiction of objects in space, such as buildings, boxes, or furniture. Practical applications. Understanding perspective allows you to draw squares and rectangles in a way that makes them look three-dimensional. This skill is crucial in many forms of art, from landscape drawing to still life, as it helps create the illusion of depth and space. Practicing perspective drawing with squares and rectangles will give you a solid foundation for tackling more complex scenes. Conclusion. Mastering the drawing of circles, ovals, squares, and rectangles is a significant step forward in your artistic journey. These shapes are not only fundamental to creating more complex forms, but they also teach you the principles of proportion, symmetry, and perspective. By practicing both freehand and precise techniques, and understanding how these shapes behave in different perspectives, you'll build a strong foundation for any drawing you wish to create. Whether you're designing a product, sketching a landscape, or drawing a portrait, these basic shapes will be your constant companions, guiding you toward more advanced and detailed artworks. Continuing from our detailed exploration of basic shapes like circles, ovals, squares, and rectangles, we now delve into the world of triangles, a fundamental shape that brings a unique set of characteristics to your drawings. Triangles are versatile and can significantly impact the structure and dynamism of your compositions. Understanding the types of triangles, how to construct them accurately, and their role in composition will elevate your drawing skills and broaden your creative possibilities. Types of triangles: equilateral, isosceles, and scalene. Triangles are defined by their three sides and three angles, but they vary widely in their forms, each offering distinct aesthetic and structural qualities. The three primary types of triangles you'll encounter are equilateral, isosceles, and scalene. Equilateral triangles. An equilateral triangle is characterized by having all three sides of equal length and all three internal angles equal, each measuring 60 degrees. This perfect symmetry makes the equilateral triangle a symbol of balance and harmony. In art and design, equilateral triangles are often used where a sense of stability and equality is desired. They are aesthetically pleasing because of their uniformity, and their symmetry makes them ideal for patterns, logos, and architectural elements that need to convey consistency and strength. Isosceles triangles. An isosceles triangle has two sides of equal length, with the third side being different. This results in two equal angles opposite the equal sides, while the third angle is different. The isosceles triangle introduces a slight asymmetry, which can create a subtle dynamic tension in a composition. Because it combines symmetry with a touch of variation, the isosceles triangle is often used in designs that require a balance but also need to highlight a focal point or create a sense of direction. The equal sides draw the eye upwards or outwards, depending on the triangle's orientation, making it a powerful tool in guiding the viewer's gaze. Scalene triangles. A scalene triangle has all sides of different lengths, and therefore, all internal angles are also different. This type of triangle is the most dynamic and irregular, often used to create a sense of movement or instability in a composition. Scalene triangles are less predictable than their equilateral and isosceles counterparts, which makes them particularly useful in modern and abstract art where the goal is to challenge traditional perceptions and introduce a sense of complexity or tension. The lack of symmetry in a scalene triangle can make a composition feel more organic and less constrained, adding interest and unpredictability to your drawings. Constructing triangles. Techniques for drawing accurate triangles. Accurate construction of triangles is essential, whether you're working freehand or with drawing tools. Precision is particularly important when triangles form the basis of a design or when they interact with other geometric shapes in your composition. Freehand techniques. When drawing triangles freehand, it's important to start with a light sketch to outline the basic shape. For an equilateral triangle, you can begin by drawing one side and then use that as a reference for the other two sides. Try to keep the angles and lengths consistent to maintain the symmetry of the triangle. For isosceles triangles, draw the two equal sides first, then connect them with a base line. This approach helps maintain the triangle's characteristic balance. Scalene triangles require careful attention to the angles and side lengths from the start, as the lack of symmetry can make them more challenging to draw freehand. Practice is key to improving your accuracy and confidence in drawing these triangles without the aid of tools. Using drawing tools. For precise triangles, especially in technical drawings or when accuracy is critical, using a ruler and protractor is essential. Start by measuring and drawing one side of the triangle. For an equilateral triangle, use a protractor to measure a 60-degree angle from each end of the base line, then draw the other two sides to complete the triangle. For isosceles triangles, measure the equal sides first, ensuring they are the same length, and then connect them with the base. In constructing a scalene triangle, each side must be measured individually, and the angles should be carefully set using the protractor to ensure accuracy. This method ensures that your triangles are mathematically correct and are ideal for designs that require exact dimensions. Triangles in composition. Their role in creating dynamic compositions. Triangles are not just basic shapes, they are powerful compositional tools that can add structure, direction, and energy to your artwork. Understanding how to use triangles effectively in your compositions can significantly enhance the visual impact of your drawings. Creating stability and focus. Equilateral and isosceles triangles, with their inherent symmetry, are often used to create stability and focus in a composition. When placed centrally or used to frame a subject, these triangles can direct the viewer's attention and create a sense of order. This technique is widely used in classical art and architecture, where balance and harmony are key aesthetic principles. For instance, an equilateral triangle can serve as a stable base in a composition, grounding the viewer's gaze and making the artwork feel more cohesive. Introducing movement and tension. In contrast, scalene triangles, with their asymmetry, can introduce a sense of movement or tension into a composition. Placing a scalene triangle at an angle or using it to break up a regular pattern can create a dynamic effect that draws the viewer's eye and adds energy to the artwork. This technique is particularly effective in modern art, where compositions often seek to evoke emotion or challenge conventional perspectives. The varied angles of a scalene triangle can create visual tension, making the composition more engaging and thought-provoking. Triangular compositions. Combining multiple triangles within a composition can create complex and intriguing designs. Overlapping triangles can form star shapes or more intricate patterns, while triangles pointing in different directions can lead the viewer's eye through the artwork in a deliberate manner. Triangular compositions are versatile and can be adapted to a wide range of artistic styles, from minimalistic designs to elaborate, detailed scenes. By mastering the use of triangles, you can create compositions that are not only visually appealing but also convey depth, movement, and emotion. In conclusion, triangles are fundamental shapes that, when used effectively, can greatly enhance your drawing skills and compositional techniques. Whether you're aiming for stability, movement, or complexity, triangles offer a wide range of possibilities for artistic expression. Now let's talk about combining basic shapes. Creating complex structures. Using combinations of circles, squares, and triangles. Drawing complex structures often begins with combining basic geometric shapes. Each shape has its unique properties, and when combined, they can create intricate forms and designs. Understanding how to mix these shapes effectively allows you to tackle more sophisticated illustrations with confidence. 1. Combining circles and squares. Circles and squares are fundamental shapes in design and drawing. To create complex structures, consider how these shapes can be merged or layered. For example, if you're drawing a simplified mechanical object like a watch, start with a circle for the face and add a square around it to represent the watch's casing. This combination effectively balances the round face with the squared casing, providing a clear and structured form. You can also use circles and squares to draw more organic forms. For instance, if you're designing a character, use a circle for the head and squares for the body and limbs. This approach helps in establishing a base form, making it easier to refine details later. The circular head will give the character a more approachable look, while the squared body and limbs provide a sense of solidity and structure. 2. Combining triangles and circles. Triangles and circles offer dynamic contrasts in shapes. When combined, they can create compelling designs with a sense of movement and energy. For instance, if you're drawing a spaceship, use a triangle for the main body to convey a streamlined, aerodynamic shape. Add circles for the engines or thrusters, giving the spaceship a balanced, functional look. In more abstract designs, triangles and circles can create interesting patterns. Consider using triangles to form a geometric pattern and fill in the spaces with circles. This can result in visually engaging designs that play with the interaction between sharp and rounded elements. 3. Combining squares and triangles. Squares and triangles are often used together to build structures with a strong geometric foundation. For example, if you're drawing a building, use squares for the base and roof, and triangles for the roof's pitch or decorative elements. This combination provides a clear architectural form, making it easier to depict a stable and recognizable structure. You can also use squares and triangles to design more complex shapes like furniture. For example, use a square for the seat of a chair and triangles for the backrest and legs. This method helps in visualizing the proportions and structure of the furniture, ensuring that it looks balanced and functional. Overlapping and intersecting shapes. Building more detailed forms. Overlapping and intersecting shapes add depth and complexity to your drawings. By carefully positioning and combining shapes, you can create more detailed and realistic forms. 1. Overlapping shapes. Overlapping shapes is a technique that helps to create a sense of depth and dimension. For example, when drawing a human figure, start with basic shapes like circles for the head and squares or rectangles for the torso and limbs. As you refine the drawing, allow the shapes to overlap in areas where the body parts meet, such as the shoulders and hips. This overlap creates a more natural and three-dimensional appearance. Similarly, when drawing objects like vehicles or machinery, use overlapping shapes to depict how different parts connect. For instance, if you're drawing a car, use rectangles and circles for the body and wheels, and overlap them to show how the wheels are attached to the chassis. This technique helps in visualizing the mechanical relationships between different parts. 2. Intersecting shapes. Intersecting shapes can be used to create more complex structures by defining the areas where different forms meet. For example, if you're drawing a cylindrical object like a pipe, use circles and rectangles. Draw the circles at each end of the pipe and connect them with a rectangle. Then, add details like grooves or joints by intersecting additional shapes with the main form. This approach helps in creating a more realistic and detailed representation of the object. In character design, intersecting shapes can help define the pose and movement. For example, when drawing an arm reaching out, use circles for the joints and lines for the bones. Intersect these shapes to show how the arm bends and extends. This technique helps in capturing dynamic poses and movement. Layering techniques. Understanding depth and layering for 3D effects. Layering techniques are crucial for creating a sense of depth and three-dimensionality in your drawings. By stacking shapes and using layering methods, you can achieve more realistic and visually engaging results. 1. Basic layering. Start by drawing the shapes that form the base of your structure. For example, if you're drawing a landscape with mountains and trees, begin with the shapes of the mountains in the background and add trees and other elements in the foreground. Layering these elements helps in establishing a sense of depth, with objects in the foreground appearing larger and more detailed compared to those in the background. 2. Advanced layering. As you become more comfortable with basic layering, experiment with more advanced techniques. For instance, when drawing a still life scene, use layering to create overlapping shadows and reflections. Draw the main objects first, then add layers of shading and texture to depict how light interacts with the objects. This technique enhances the three-dimensional effect and adds realism to your drawings. You can also use layering to create intricate patterns or textures. For example, when drawing a textured surface like fabric, layer different shapes and lines to simulate the fabric's texture. This approach adds depth and interest to your drawing, making it more engaging. Structure and form. From 2D to 3D. Turning basic shapes into three-dimensional forms. Understanding how to convert basic shapes from a two-dimensional to a three-dimensional perspective is fundamental to creating realistic and dynamic drawings. This process involves mastering perspective, volume, shading, and basic anatomy, each of which contributes to a more lifelike representation of objects and figures in space. 1. Understanding perspective. Perspective is a technique that simulates three-dimensional depth on a two-dimensional plane, enabling artists to create the illusion of space and distance. Basic perspective principles. Perspective involves various principles that help create the illusion of depth. The most fundamental concept is the vanishing point, where parallel lines appear to converge. Begin by drawing a horizon line and establish one or more vanishing points on this line. This will serve as the basis for constructing shapes and objects in perspective. One-point perspective. Ideal for depicting scenes where objects are viewed head-on. Draw a square representing the front face of a box and extend lines from each corner towards the vanishing point. This creates a simple cube with a single vanishing point. Two-point perspective. Useful for drawing objects at an angle. Start with two vanishing points on the horizon line and draw lines from the corners of a shape to each vanishing point. This technique allows you to depict objects that are turned, such as buildings or boxes seen from a corner. Three-point perspective. Introduced for more complex scenes involving objects viewed from below or above. Add a third vanishing point either above or below the horizon line. Lines extending from the base of objects towards this third point will help you create a more dynamic sense of vertical depth. Drawing basic shapes in perspective. Practice drawing simple shapes like rectangles, circles, and triangles using perspective techniques. For example, start with a rectangle and convert it into a three-dimensional box by drawing lines that converge towards a vanishing point. Apply these techniques to create a variety of objects, such as cylinders and pyramids. Complex perspective applications. As you become more comfortable with basic perspective, apply these principles to more complex scenarios. Practice drawing interior spaces, streets, and cityscapes using multiple vanishing points to achieve greater depth and realism. Experiment with different angles and viewpoints to understand how perspective affects the representation of objects in space. 2. Adding volume. To transform basic shapes into three-dimensional forms, it's crucial to add volume and depth to your drawings. Extending basic shapes. Start with fundamental shapes such as circles, squares, and triangles. To turn a circle into a cylinder, draw vertical lines extending from the edges of the circle and connect them to a second circle placed above it. Similarly, to convert a square into a cube, extend lines from each corner of the square to another square placed behind it. Visualizing volume. Consider how shapes occupy space and how they interact with their surroundings. For example, to create a cone, begin with a triangle and add an ellipse at the base. Draw lines connecting the edges of the triangle to the ellipse to form the cone's volume. This will help you understand the spatial relationships between different parts of the shape. Refining forms. Enhance your shapes by adding contours and adjusting proportions. For instance, smooth out sharp edges to make a form look more natural or emphasize certain features to highlight its volume. Adding rounded edges or altering proportions based on perspective will result in a more convincing three-dimensional appearance. Dynamic forms. Practice creating dynamic forms by altering basic shapes into complex objects. For example, extend the sides of a cylinder to form a column or adjust the curves of a sphere to create different types of orbs or globes. Understanding how to manipulate basic shapes will allow you to create more intricate and detailed objects. 3. Refining 3D forms. Refinement involves adding details and textures to make three-dimensional forms appear more realistic. Detailing surface features. Add surface details such as grooves, reflections, and textures to your shapes. For example, if drawing a metal object, incorporate highlights and reflections to indicate its shininess. For a wooden object, use lines to suggest the grain and texture. Surface textures. Explore various textures by drawing different materials, such as rough wood, smooth glass, or gritty stone. Experiment with different shading techniques to capture these textures effectively. Practice drawing various surfaces to understand how light interacts with different materials. Understanding proportions and scale. Ensure that all details and textures are proportionate to the form. Accurate proportions and scaling are crucial for maintaining a realistic appearance. Adjust the size and placement of details based on the object's perspective and volume to achieve a coherent and lifelike representation. Scale and context. Consider the context in which your object is placed. For example, a small object might appear differently in the foreground compared to a large object in the background. Adjust your details and proportions accordingly to reflect the object's scale within the scene. Understanding light and shadow. Adding depth through shading. Shading is essential for adding depth and realism to your drawings by simulating how light interacts with objects. 1. Basic shading techniques. Hatching and cross-hatching. Begin with fundamental shading techniques like hatching and cross-hatching. Hatching involves drawing parallel lines to create shaded areas, while cross-hatching adds intersecting lines to build up shading and texture. Practice these techniques on basic shapes to understand their effects on light and shadow. Layering and intensity. Adjust the density and spacing of your lines to control the intensity of the shading. Experiment with layering lines to achieve different levels of darkness and texture. This will help you create more nuanced and detailed shading effects. Stippling and blending. Explore stippling, which uses dots to create shading, and blending, which involves smoothing out transitions between light and dark areas. Use stippling for more delicate and subtle shading, and blending for smoother transitions. Practice these techniques on various shapes to understand their effects on texture and depth. 2. Light sources and shadows. Identifying light sources. Determine the direction and intensity of the light source in your drawing. Understanding how light affects objects is crucial for creating realistic shadows. A single light source will produce distinct shadows, while multiple sources or diffused light will result in softer shadows. Shadow placement. Apply shadows based on the light source's position. For instance, if the light comes from the top left, shade the bottom right areas of your shapes to create the shadow. Consider how shadows will fall on and around the object to enhance the sense of depth. Shadow variations. Different objects cast different types of shadows. Experiment with hard and soft shadows to depict various surfaces and materials. For example, a smooth surface may cast a soft shadow, while a rough or textured surface creates a more irregular shadow. Casting and occlusion shadows. Understand the difference between casting shadows cast by the object itself and occlusion shadows where the object obscures light falling on another surface. This distinction helps in creating more realistic and accurate shading. 3. Advanced shading techniques. Gradient shading. Create smooth transitions from light to dark using gradient shading. Gradually change the intensity of shading to achieve a realistic effect. Practice creating gradients on different shapes, such as spheres and cylinders, to master this technique. Blending techniques. Use blending tools, such as tortillons or brushes, to smooth out shading transitions. Experiment with different blending methods to achieve varying textures and effects in your drawings. Blending can help create more detailed and nuanced shading. Reflections and highlights. Incorporate reflections and highlights to add realism to your shading. For reflective surfaces, draw light spots where the light hits directly, and use blending to simulate the reflection's gradual transition. Basic anatomy. Using shapes to build human figures and objects. Constructing human figures and objects using basic shapes simplifies complex forms and ensures accurate proportions. 1. Constructing human figures. Using simple shapes. Outline the human figure using basic shapes like circles, rectangles, and ovals. Circles can represent the head and joints, while rectangles and ovals can be used for the torso and limbs. This method helps establish the basic proportions and pose of the figure. Proportions and anatomy. Refine the basic shapes to match human anatomy more closely. Adjust the proportions of the head, torso, and limbs based on standard human proportions. Add details such as muscles, facial features, and clothing to enhance the figure's realism. Posing and movement. Practice drawing figures in various poses and movements. Use basic shapes to construct dynamic poses, ensuring accurate proportions and anatomical correctness. Experiment with different angles and positions to understand human movement and structure. Gesture drawing. Incorporate gesture drawing to capture the essence of movement and posture quickly. Focus on the flow and action of the pose rather than precise details. This practice helps in achieving more natural and fluid figure drawings. 2. Drawing objects. Constructing objects. Use basic shapes to build the structure of objects. For example, draw rectangles for a chair's seat and backrest, and cylinders for the legs. This approach simplifies the drawing process and helps in visualizing the object's structure. Adding details. Once the basic shape is established, add details to enhance the object's realism. Incorporate textures, patterns, and additional features to make the object more lifelike. For instance, add upholstery details to a chair or wood grain to a table. Understanding proportions. Maintain accurate proportions and relationships between different parts of the object. Proper proportions are essential for a coherent and realistic appearance. Adjust the size and placement of details based on the object's perspective and scale. Functional and aesthetic details. Consider both functional and aesthetic aspects when adding details. Ensure that functional elements, such as joints or hinges, are correctly placed and proportioned. Pay attention to aesthetic details that enhance the object's visual appeal. 3. Combining figures and objects. Integrating figures and objects. Combine human figures and objects by constructing both using basic shapes. For example, when drawing a person sitting on a chair, use shapes to build both the figure and the chair. This approach ensures accurate proportions and interactions. Creating interactions. Depict how the figure interacts with the object. Draw the figure's limbs in contact with the object, ensuring that proportions and positions are accurate. This method adds realism and depth to your drawings. Enhancing composition. Consider the overall composition of your drawing. Arrange the figure and objects in a way that enhances visual interest and balance. Pay attention to the placement of elements to create a cohesive and engaging composition. Foreground and background elements. Incorporate foreground and background elements to add depth and context. Position objects and figures within a broader scene to enhance the sense of space and environment. Conclusion. Mastering the transformation of basic shapes into three-dimensional forms involves understanding perspective, volume, shading, and anatomy. By practicing these techniques, you can create complex and realistic drawings that capture depth and dimension. Regular practice and experimentation with different shapes, perspectives, and shading methods will help you refine your skills and develop a more sophisticated and lifelike drawing style. Now let's talk about most important step: practice exercises. To develop your drawing skills effectively, it's essential to start with basic practice exercises that build a solid foundation. One of the most crucial aspects is shape drills, which focus on improving accuracy and confidence in drawing fundamental shapes. By repeatedly practicing circles, squares, rectangles, triangles, and ellipses, you can enhance your precision and control. Begin with circles of various sizes, aiming for smooth, even curvature. Move on to squares and rectangles, paying attention to achieving right angles and equal sides. Practice drawing triangles with different side lengths and angles, and tackle ellipses, which require a steady hand and consistent curves. Regular practice, ideally 10 to 20 minutes each day, is key to developing muscle memory and improving overall drawing skills. Use drawing aids like grids and templates, but also challenge yourself to draw freehand to build confidence and skill. Once you are comfortable with basic shapes, the next step is to explore creative combinations. This exercise involves using these shapes to construct more complex objects. Start with simple items like houses, trees, or cars, breaking them down into basic components. For instance, a house can be represented with a square for the base and a triangle for the roof, while a tree might be composed of circles for the foliage and a rectangle for the trunk. Practice combining shapes to create more intricate designs, such as robots or other characters, using a mix of rectangles, circles, and triangles. This exercise not only improves your ability to draw complex forms but also encourages creative thinking and application of fundamental skills. Structure challenges further refine your ability to create coherent forms using basic shapes. This involves constructing basic structures like towers or bridges using a variety of shapes such as cubes, cylinders, and cones. Experiment with different arrangements and combinations to understand how shapes interact to form stable and aesthetically pleasing structures. Additionally, geometric compositions, such as decorative patterns or sculptures, help you grasp how geometric shapes can be used to create visually interesting designs. Drawing simple architectural elements like columns, arches, or staircases will also enhance your understanding of how shapes work together in a functional structure. Using reference images and experimenting with different shapes will aid in mastering this aspect of drawing. The final project integrates all the skills you've developed through the previous exercises. Choose a simple object, such as a piece of fruit or a household item, and begin by breaking it down into basic shapes. For example, an apple can be represented with a circle for the body and an oval for the stem. Lightly sketch these basic shapes, focusing on accuracy and proportion. Gradually refine your sketch by adding details, texture, and shading to bring the object to life. Review your final drawing, making any necessary adjustments to ensure accuracy and consistency. This project serves as a culmination of your practice, demonstrating your ability to apply foundational skills to create a complete and polished drawing. In summary, these exercises provide a comprehensive approach to mastering drawing basics. Shape drills build accuracy and confidence, creative combinations foster creativity, structure challenges enhance understanding of form and stability, and the final project ties everything together in a practical application. Consistent practice and attention to detail in each step will significantly improve your drawing abilities.